Hey, good morning, guys. Welcome back after spring break. Hope everybody enjoyed the week off. Did some fun things with their friends or their family. Just want to quickly go over the last assignment that I gave before break. Just kind of go through these answers, and we'll spend tomorrow. Actually, I'll give an assignment that kind of reviews what we did the first couple days. So we're solving these trig equations. Our answers are going to be special angles. The pi over threes, the pi over sixes, fours, the ones that fall on the x or the y axis. So when you're given a problem, you can pretty much just, like I've said in the videos leading up to this, you can ignore the cosine or the sine. Just solve it like you would for x algebraically. It just differs when you get to the end. Instead of having x equals 0 or x equaling 1/2, it's now cosine x equals 0, cosine x equals a half. Okay, so the methods that you're going to need to use to solve these would be something like factoring, taking out a GCF like we did in number 1 here. Okay, and remember, once you take that out, you could always, at this part here, redistribute if you're unsure. But like I said, just ignore the cosine for now, all right? And I think that might make you see things a little easier if you factor it out in x, right? So once we solve for x, or once we solve for cosine x, once we get to this step here, it's now asking ourselves, okay, what angle, all right, what special angle has an x value of 0? Or where is x 0? And it's 0 on the y-axis. And those two angles would be pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. Just like here, we would ask ourselves, what angle has an x value, cosines x? What value, or what angle has an x value of 1/2? And because it's positive 1/2, it would be in the first and the fourth quadrant. And that's where I got pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. Okay, something like in number 2, where you want to get x by itself. So in this case, we first need to get x squared by itself. So I would add 3, I would divide by 4. And because we have sine squared, you would need to take the square root of both sides. And we know anytime we do that, we're going to have plus or minus. So when you take the square root of both sides and you end up with plus or minus, that's when you're going to be in 4 quadrants like we were here. When we have all, in this case, pi over 3 as our answer. Right? What angle has a y value of root 3 over 2? Okay, well, it's the same angle that has an x value of 1/2. Right? It's pi over 3. In number 3, okay, 3 terms here to start out. And again, just ignore the cosine, and x squared minus x minus 1. That's something that, or I'm sorry, 2x squared. You've factored that for a long time now, right? That's an algebra problem. What makes it pre-calc or trig is the fact that, well, it's not just x, it's cosine x. So what value has, or what angle has an x value of negative 1/2? Okay, so that would be pi over 3 as our reference angle. But because x is negative, it's got to be in quadrants 2 and 3, and that's why 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3 are my answers. Well, what angle has an x value of 1? Right here on the x-axis, right? And that value is 0. Now, it would be 2 pi or 4 pi or 6 pi, really an infinite number of answers. But that's why we're going to limit ourselves. We're going to keep our answers between 0 and 2 pi. 2 pi being non-inclusive. All right, so just try to remember, if you're right here, your answer is 0. All right, number 4 is very similar. It's factoring. It's getting 2 parentheses set up, 2 products, and if we had FOILed this back out, we would certainly get what we started with. Be careful with your signs. And what I said the day prior to break was, just solve this problem for cosecant. Get it cosecant x equals 2, cosecant x equals -1, and then don't think of it in terms of cosecant. Now let's just take the reciprocal, which is sine, because I think it's a little easier for us to think of the y values that have a sine of 1/2 or a sine of -1 than it would be for us to think in terms of cosecant. Okay? So if you get a problem that's cosecant or secant starting out, solve it, and then eventually take the reciprocal and put it back in terms of sine or cosine. All right. So in number 5, there's no GCF here. So we just want to get x by itself. We want to add 2. We want to divide by 3. Now, hopefully you didn't rationalize this one because you knew it was cosecant. So it's like, okay, well, let me just take the reciprocal. And now I have, well, what angle has a y value, right? Sine is y. What angle has a y value of root 3 over 2? And again, it's denominator 3. Y is positive up top. So only these two angles were my answers. All right, same thing in 6. 6 is a problem where we're going to have to get x squared by itself. We'll add 4, we'll divide by 3. We'll take the square root of both sides, right? The square root of 4 is 2, root 3. But again, I'm not going to rationalize. I'm just going to now take secant and make it its reciprocal, cosine. And again, anytime you take the square root of both sides, plus or minus, right? Plus or minus. That's when you end up having angles in all 4 quadrants, when you have plus or minus. Okay, you could have solved number 7 in a couple different ways. It is the difference of squares, so you could have factored. Or you could add 1, divide by 4, square root both sides, and go about it this way. Either way, you would get the same answer. Okay. And then finally in number 8, again, 3 terms. If it's easier for you, just ignore the sign. Think of it as 2x squared plus 3x plus 1. That should be one where we should be able to look at that and say, okay, well, we need to factor this, right? We need to find factors of 2 and 1 that could somehow, when I multiply, give me 3. And when I multiply these last terms here, 1 and 1, I'll get this remaining term. Okay, so continue solving for x. You would subtract 1, divide by 2, subtract 1. Hey, Olivia. Hey. Daddy's almost done. Sorry, so what angle has a y value of negative 1/2 or negative 1? And that would be pi over 6, right? But again, this right here, and eventually we're going to start talking about non-special angles with the calculator, and that's when we introduce the idea of reference angles. So pi over 6 is my reference angle, right? But it's not the one I necessarily use because we need the ones here that would satisfy the negative, right? The negative 1/2. And that would be in 3 and 4. And that's why my answers are 7 pi and 11 pi over 6. Okay. And then over on this side, sine x equals negative 1. Where's y negative 1? Well, it's negative 1 at 3 pi over 2. All right. Guys, hopefully this helps. Like I said, this was before break. Today you'll see the assignment is just going to be to kind of watch this video, make sure you have it down, and also do that questionnaire that I had sent out earlier. Just try to get a feel, see how you guys are making out, how you're doing, what type of things you're doing to pass the time outside of school. If you've got into some different shows or movies or whatever the case is. I hope everybody's doing well. Kind of excited to kind of start things up again here. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.